AI might be a rehearsal for E.T. There it is in 10 words or less.
Well, that's from AI to E.T. Give us a little more specifics. You're kind of here to set the program up for our viewers and to lay the broad framework, so keep it going.
Before I get into all those ideas of it being humanizing and whether or not it's intelligence, which are pretty well opinions that will be expressed on the show, let me give you an idea of just what the computer can do. And basically, computers can only do two things. They can calculate, which is add and subtract or do mathematics, and they can sort. You can give them a whole store of information, give them your file cabinet, and they will very quickly go through that information and perhaps find specific facts or give you associations or make relationships that perhaps you didn't see before. In terms of the calculating ability of the computer, that's the oldest function, the oldest kind of computer that's been around. The Chinese have had it for about 2,000 years or more with the beads on a string, the abacus, where they can calculate. And I was in China just earlier this year, and they still use them. When you go into a store, there's no cash register, it's an abacus, and they're sitting there flicking away these things, and it's still a very good thing. Here in North America, we have the pocket calculator, but it's doing the same thing. All it is adding. I don't think of this as a smart machine. However, with the adding and subtracting ability, the mathematical ability of a machine, like a computer, we can make mathematical models of various things, and then we can tell that to the computer and have the computer do things for us. We can program it. And when you give a computer a very rigid set of instructions, first you do this, then do that, then do this, you will get from here to there, whether it be a robot, if you want to go to another planet, for example, then that's called an algorithm, and that's just a set of rules. And some people think that this is smart because you might see a robot going through a series of events and there's no human around and it's just sort of sniffing around, or maybe it's assembling a car, or it's doing some very specific task, and it seems to be smart, when really the intelligence there is in the foresight of the programmer, the person who figured out what are all the things that we need to do to get that task done. Now, to give you an example of that, I have a film that is a computer-generated film. It's a mathematical model that shows a spacecraft going by the planet Saturn. This actually happened before the spacecraft went there. The spacecraft was called Pioneer 11. They wanted to know, what's the spacecraft going to see? Well, we know how far away Saturn is. We know how big it is. We know what the gravitational perturbations of the spacecraft are. So we put all of those calculations into the computer, and then the computer constructed the model for us. So every frame of this film that you're seeing as the spacecraft goes by the planet was simply a mathematical calculation. The spacecraft itself was a robot. It's so far away from the Earth that we can't really talk to it. It takes about an hour and a half to get a message to Saturn and back. So the spacecraft had to be able to do things like look down on the underside of the rings and examine the lightning that was happening down on Saturn, and then point its camera.
Look for a parking place.
Yeah, and find out if there's anything there. It was an alien environment that's too far away and too dangerous for humans to go. And it knew where to point its cameras at various things. Well, there's an example of a robot doing something following a very linear sequence of events. Well, I don't really think of that as artificial intelligence, and a lot of people do. There is, however, another aspect of computing, which is this sorting aspect. And this gets closer to the human process of thinking.
Well, that's like a file clerk.
Sort of. Or if you have a problem, if I ask you a problem, then you will answer my question according to your experience, according to what you know.
I sort through my own memory bank and come out with...
That's right. And you might make associations. If you were a medical doctor who perhaps studied lung disease, then I would say, well, look, I've got this funny cough, and what's that mean? And then you'd ask me a series of questions.
Well, now you're defining what they call expert systems.
Expert or smart programs. Yeah. And this kind of thing is where the computer is given a memory that is a series of events, the gathering of an expertise of a number of different fields, or maybe one field. And then when the computer is asked a question, it searches that memory and looks for the right association.
Now, you've given us two examples of computers, the calculator and the expert memory. But isn't there a third and much more important dimension of machines or entities that can think, reason, create, have senses of humor, perhaps flirt? God knows what.
Yes, there is. And
what would you call them?
I'd still call them tools. I'd still just call them machines that have been carefully programmed. There is the ability to make decisions, yes. And there's the, again, it's sort of part of this sorting aspect. that if I have a problem and it's a very complex problem, then the computer can sort of say, well, this problem sort of relates to something I know over here, and it sort of relates to something over here, so I'm going to put those two together and say that's your answer. Now, fortunately, we don't give the computer the final say. The computer, in terms of something like medical diagnostics, where we'll say, associate these symptoms and give me the disease, the doctor will then say, well, I agree with that, or I don't agree with it, and then he's using it as
We're not ready for a war game scenario where the human is taken out of the loop.
No, the human is still a very, very integral part of it. There are two other aspects of artificial intelligence that are within this, that are trying to make the computer easier to relate to. You see, the human is one of the slower links in this whole chain. Computers can think very fast. Well, I hate to use that word, think.
I've heard a lot about friendly computers and unfriendly, but we've also have the concept of friendly humans and unfriendly too.
Yes, we do. And in order to make computers more user-friendly, what we're trying to do is bridge that gap so that you can talk to it more easily. And there's a whole area whereby the computer has its own language, because if it has an incredibly large memory, or if there are several computers working together to try to solve a problem, they need time to get through those programs, and so there are shortcut languages that are being developed within the computers themselves. And these languages are hard for the humans to translate and to work on. So what they're trying to do is to develop a language whereby the computer can understand English. So you can say, hi, I got a problem, what is it? And say it in English and the computer can understand it.
Or Spanish, or Japanese.
Or different languages. And even respond
or street
to...
hip, huh?
Right, or even respond to voice control. Mm-hmm. The other is vision. We'd like to give computers vision so that they can see where they're going and be able to recognize patterns and pick things up. Canada's involved in that, by the way, with the space arm, the shuttle space arm. They're going to try to give it eyes. Now that we have an arm, we're going to give it eyes. If all of these things come together, the fifth generation, which is sort of the embodiment of all of these things, of decision-making, supposedly reason, the ability to select various problems and see and move around, and we get it all into a robotic, then we're dealing with a machine that can apparently think and move around and relate to us. And whether or not it is actually thinking is something we have to deal with.
At this moment, I'm a thinking machine, doing my best to relate. You got my brain spinning in the best sense.
Joining Dr. Leary is Wendy Lennox.
Wendy, I'm glad you're here. In reading your work, which I find, by the way, inspiring and intelligence increasing, the word natural language comes up a lot. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, we use the term natural language to differentiate it from computer programming languages. When we talk about natural language processing by computer, we're talking about getting computers to understand English, French, whatever language it is that you normally speak. So we're trying to increase the ease with which people can use computers, and we're incidentally trying to learn a lot about how people use natural language in order to achieve this. Now, it might not be at all obvious what's difficult about getting computers to do natural language. We traditionally think of computers being able to compute. They perform
do
arithmetic
great chess
operations.
problems and solve great mathematical equations and
That's right.
tough stuff like that.
We associate certain tasks with computers, and natural language does not seem to be one of them. As we try to get computers to understand natural language, we understand a lot more about what's difficult in that task. For example, when I speak to you and you hear my sentences, you make a lot of assumptions that could in fact be wrong. We call these inferences. For example, if I'm talking to you about a mutual friend, John, and I mention to you, did you hear John almost got hit by a car last night?
Oh.
It's not at all clear exactly what must have happened, but you make some inferences that John must have been outside, John must have been engaged in some sort of an activity, and this has implications, this has consequences. We can have expectations about this interfering with something that John was doing, and we're naturally concerned. We think to ask, was he hurt? Mm-hmm. What happened? Now these are all functions that people handle quite naturally, and it's something that is not at all easy for a computer. Inferences are assumptions that could be wrong, and it's been estimated that 80% of the communication content that flies between people is of this nature. If a computer is missing this information, the computer is not dealing with natural language in any sort of a reasonable sense.
Well, of course, we can't be too hard on the computer or the knowledge information processing unit, because people too make faulty inferences. And what is this teaching us about the human mind? I'm a psychologist, and naturally I'm eager to know what we can find out about how the human mind works.
We're learning a lot about the nature of human intelligence. For example, when I ask you what impresses you as intelligent behavior, we tend to associate easy tasks with things that everyone can do, and everyone can do fairly effortlessly. So, for example, most people can drive a car. That's not very impressive. We don't take that to be a hard task. On the other hand, not very many people can prove theorems or play master-level chess. We tend to find that impressive. Also, the things that children can do strike us as being easy, whereas the things that we only learn to do after the age of 20 or 30 strike us as being more impressive. Now, with computers, we discover an irony involved in that kind of developmental view of impressive behavior. With computers, it's actually easier to program a system to play master-level chess, to prove theorems, to hypothesize results in mathematics, than it is to, for example, get a computer to recognize images in a scene or understand simple sentences and respond to them in reasonable ways. So we're seeing an inverse.
Because computers were designed by high-level mathematicians and chess players, maybe?
Not at all, not at all. It has to do with the essential nature of the processes that we're working with. Some processes only draw on a very limited, constrained amount of knowledge, and we can characterize that knowledge in a fairly comprehensive, intelligible way. We can talk to someone who plays master-level chess. We can ask them, how is it you do this? What's the difference between a beginning game and a middle game and an end game? We can get some information out about that process of playing chess. But when we get down to the low-level, apparently easy tasks like visual scene analysis and natural language understanding, or driving a car, it's very hard to introspect on exactly what processes are at work.
It's hard to get the average person to explain how they drive from one corner of a town to the other?
It's difficult in terms of the very, very low-level processes which we have all become unconscious of. Mm-hmm. When you first started learning to drive a car, you had to think very hard about how much pressure to put on the brake, how to balance the clutch, how soon to start turning the wheel to make it respond to a curve in the road. You really worked very hard in mastering that skill. But once you had it, it was down. It sort of got...
reflex.
It became a reflex.
Habit.
We think of it as a reflex. And we're no longer impressed by it. But the fact of the matter is that there's a lot of cognitive work which is still ongoing. The fact that we aren't conscious of it, preoccupied by it, or attending to it doesn't make it any less impressive than it was when we first started acquiring the skill. Things like scene analysis and language are skills that we can't remember having ever acquired, and it's very difficult for us to appreciate how much effort goes into those tasks.
Wendy, do you think that this work on superintelligence or artificial intelligence is going to help us understand more about human nature and human psychology?
Well, we're certainly learning a lot about the human mind, which psychology and philosophy and linguistics was not in a position to teach us.
Isn't that interesting? One of the side effects here seems to be that, as a psychologist, I'm embarrassed to realize that we psychologists don't know that much about how the mind works, and I know the philosophers are a little worried that you're raising questions about human nature and the very value systems.
There's some very healthy interactions going on between the disciplines because people realize that AI has something to tell the other disciplines that are interested in the study of mind. And I think we're coming to appreciate the difference between information and knowledge.
Yeah.
I think we should make a very strong distinction between information in the sense of the kind of passive information that's present in a library. Mm-hmm. We don't think of libraries as having intelligence per se.
And books don't think, really.
Books don't think. The library is not intelligent. Mm-hmm. It's a person who goes into the library and uses that knowledge who becomes intelligent. And knowledge is therefore information plus structure, the ability to find relevant information when you need it, apply it to appropriate tasks as needed, and sort through, again, sorting came up earlier, in some sense, intelligently access and sort through all of the hundreds of millions of thousands of billions of things that people know in order to use the things we need when we need them.
How about to innovate or to create, to come up with originality?
Well, I think we're learning a lot about what we normally call intuitive thought processes, creative processes, which are are normally thought to be very mystical and untouchable, and how could science ever say anything about these processes? I think what makes them mystical and untouchable is the same thing that makes driving a car difficult to understand. It's just a process that we can't introspect on. It's no different than any other, and we can study it just like any other.
Poetry too. We'll have good machine poetry and bad machine poetry.
Well, of course, that's always been a controversial area to pass judgment on, and I don't think computers are going to make that one any easier.
But more interesting.
It's certainly a lot of fun.
Are these machines going to surpass us in intelligence or stimulate us? Or?
Well, I think when people ask that question, they're really asking, will machines be capable of intelligent behavior, which is in some sense very different from human intelligent behavior. And to some extent, in an uninteresting way, that's already happened. The expert systems are much more reliable than people in the sense that they aren't subject to the kinds of distractions and lapses that people have. So on a very uninteresting level there.
Now. We'll continue in a moment after this break.
Although artificial intelligence is the single most exciting development in computer technology, there are scientists who urge caution. Our next guest is one of the most widely respected computer scientists who believes that the crucial difference between man and machine is one of risk, courage, trust, and endurance. Joining Dr. Leary is Joseph Weizenbaum.
Professor Weizenbaum, it's a great honor and pleasure to have you here. I've always felt for many years that you're a hero and legend in your own time. In the last 20 years, many of us have felt concerned about the monolithic computer age, the IBMs, the KGBs, the credit card checks, and so forth. And your voice has been heard throughout the land, kind of defending the individual and the human aspects. How did you fall into this, if I may say so, heroic role?
Well, I certainly didn't choose it. There are lots of ways to answer that question, because I think human experience in general is sort of like a Rashomon story. That is, that there may be 4 or 5 or 7 different accounts of something, all of them right, and yet each slightly contradicting the other. I think in my own case, I happened to be at MIT, and I happened to be there at a very interesting time, in the sense that of the Chinese who think of it as a curse to say, "May you live in interesting times." I'm thinking of the Vietnam War and what went on in universities at the time and so on.
Oh, the time of upheaval and questioning and challenging.
Exactly, and especially at MIT, which is rather closely connected to Washington, was at the time as well, and so on. And at that time, I was working on what was then called conversational programming, that is, dealing with a computer not in the way of first writing a program, then giving it to the computer, then waiting for the computer to execute that program, and then seeing what one wants to do with the results and so on, but the way it's done now pretty much, for example, on home computers, that is that you sit there, you write a few lines and get the computer reacts and so on and so forth. And in that time, I wrote a program that made it possible to converse with the computer in natural language.
The famous Eliza.
Yeah, the infamous Eliza, of whom I can't get rid. Anyway, and it was, a couple of things happened there. One is I noticed very quickly how deeply people who played with it became attached to the thing, so to speak. In effect, the holding power of the computer, and that on the basis of what I knew to be a rather very simple program. And even then, I think many of the people who experienced this holding power were in fact computer people at MIT who knew very well what was going on. And so
couldn't it be like a book? The first time I'm sure the book came along, people had that holding power, and people were attributing magic, and they couldn't tear the kid away from the book. Is there some analogy there?
I don't know whether that happened or not, but there might very well be. Nevertheless, I found that interesting and to a certain extent disturbing. Again, the sort of the power of the grip that I could observe.
I think we should perhaps explain for a moment, Professor, what Eliza is.
Well, Eliza was continues to exist, unfortunately, not through my doing. Anyway, ELIZA was a program which caused the computer, so to speak, to pretend to be a psychiatrist in an initial psychiatric interview. And the mode of use was that someone playing the role of a patient.
You type in your questions, your problems?
That's right. You type in, for example, I can't sleep at night, for example, the sort of thing you might say to a psychiatrist initially. And partially out of the stuff that people type in, and partially out of its own storage, the computer would construct a response, which is generally a question, like, for example, why can't you sleep, or something of that sort.
It's kind of mirroring back and throwing back, getting the person to talk more. Huh?
That's right. Yeah. That's right. All the thing really did is to encourage the person to keep talking.
Pour out the list of troubles.
Yeah. And the other thing that disturbed me so about it was that there were psychiatrists in the United States, even fairly well-known psychoanalysts, who saw this as the beginning of computerized psychiatry. And I found that thought to be just terribly abhorrent, computerized psychiatry. And not only does the program continue to live in one way or another, there's people are selling it, for example, and so on, but the idea that a computer can, in fact, engage in therapeutic conversations and psychotherapeutic conversations, that idea won't die. And resurfaces over and over and over again, and I find that very disturbing.
Well, again, though, isn't it like a self-help book? People know that the book is simply a bunch of words on paper, but it's some way of stimulating thought or stimulating questioning and getting the person to reflect on their own situation.
Well, that's one interpretation, but let's look at it another way. Let's look at, say, a Christmas card or a get well card, or something of that sort. Now, people who believe that the sentiments expressed on that card, represent love coming from the card or something of that sort, or for that matter, love coming from the sender of the card. The sender of the card chose the card and sent it, and that's all the sender did. Mm-hmm. And one doesn't believe that the card understands or anything of the sort. The belief that so many people had that the machine actually understood them. Yes, the machine understood me, no matter what I'd say. They'd say, yes, I know it's a very simple program, and so on and so forth, but nevertheless, I'm quite sure the machine understood me.
The difference between the card and the machine program, though, is that if you get a get well card, it says get well. Yeah. But if you say, gee, thanks a lot, it doesn't say you're welcome.
Yeah.
Whereas the machine did.
You've been you're very well known and continue to be a spokesman of caution about artificial intelligence. Yet something's happened recently that has encouraged me and kind of quieted some of my fears, and that's this explosion of personal computing, the fact that everyone can have in their own home the hardware and the software and the rudimentary knowledge, so that we don't have to be victimized or feel spindled and mutilated by IBM and the big corporations, that the movies War Games and the idea of young kids learning how to fight back, even the rebellion and the insistence on individuality, and the fact that the establishment is now upset about kids and personal computers. Isn't this a source of comfort for you?
Not at all. I'm stunned by what you say. For example, let's just pick up on what almost the very last thing you said. You talked about the insistence on individuality, or that individuality gets widespread. It's a common statement people make that the computer makes it possible to treat the people individually and in general to individualize. I don't quite like that word. Products. There's no reason in the world why everyone should have the same suit on. When computers make suits, they can make each suit different from every other suit, and so on and so forth. In fact, if we look at what's actually happening and what's happened already, we see that the computer has had and is having an enormously homogenizing effect. As we all tend to do things in the same way because of the computer.
Don't you think the personal computer with personal programs is going to an individual software?
The mistake there is I think in the idea of personal programs. I think very, very few people are going to write their own programs for personal computers. Now, people we know, the three of us, they're likely to write programs for their personal computer, but they're a very special kind. They're people who teach computer science in universities and so on. I think what's going to happen to the home computer, apart from the use of the home computer for games and word processing, quite apart from those two, is The home computer will suffer the fate very largely of home movie cameras. There are today millions of home movie cameras in closets and drawers and so on. They're in perfect working order, but haven't been used for years. And the reason
in
for
a
that,
minute or two, we're going to have...
let me just finish this. The reason for that is that people thought that if they buy a very good movie camera, they could make very good movies, okay? And they forgot that in order to make a good movie, you have to have a good idea. Similarly with computers, okay? You buy a big expensive computer or a complex or a very powerful computer, and you have the idea. Now that you have all that power at your fingertips, you're going to do something marvelous. Again, you need an idea. Very few people have ideas on how to use a computer effectively.
Well, you've certainly contributed to ideas today, and we're going to have others, I know, that are going to share and interact with your ideas. Hold on for a minute, we'll be right back.
Our next guest believes that machines will indeed be soon calling people. He's an artificial intelligence researcher from the Carnegie Mellon University who is convinced that the new developments in this field will be of the utmost benefit to mankind. Joining Dr. Leary is Professor Jaime Carbonell.
Thanks for being with us today. We've had a lot of free-flowing discussion here, from space to down-to-earth problems. Maybe you could focus for one moment on what does an artificial intelligence scientist expert do? How do you spend your days and time, and what are you working on?
Well, I work primarily on two aspects of artificial intelligence. One called cognitive modeling, which is trying to understand and replicate some aspects of human reasoning in the computer in order to better understand the human reasoning and in order to endow the computer with the capability to interact with a person, not only in developing the language, the natural language, so that it can understand written or spoken English or any other language, but also so that it can make the same inferences that Wendy referred to earlier in this discussion. To give you an example...
You're going to get a super intelligent machine that can be like a New York cab driver then, huh?
Well, superintelligence is not the objective. The objective is to try to replicate human intelligence. In fact, it is more difficult to replicate common sense reasoning than it is to show some aspects of creativity. To give you one analogy, let's suppose that we have a master and child prodigy, and the master who has just taught the child prodigy some aspects of physics gives the child a barometer, measures pressure, air pressure, and a tall building, and says, well, use this barometer to tell me how high the tall building is. And the child prodigy thinks a little bit, walks up to the top of the tall building, or takes the elevator, looks at his watch, drops the barometer down, counts how long it takes to smash the floor, and then computes the, by the venerable formula 1/2 GT squared, how, from the time it took, how tall the building must be. The master is very upset. That's not the proper use of the barometer.
I'm upset too. I've never thought of that.
And then he says to the child, to the prodigy, here's another barometer. Do not break this one. See if you can make this calculation. The child goes and knocks on the superintendent's door and says, I will give you this valuable barometer that I'm not allowed to break if you will tell me how tall the building is. No, the master says that's not it either. The child looks at the shadow of the building, puts down the barometer, knows how high the barometer is, and by mathematical triangulation computes the height. At this point, the master gives up and says, this child is very creative, but he does not know how to use a barometer. Well, the moral here is that computers are like that. In most of the programs that I wind up building, very often solve problems in very intricate and unexpected ways, and very seldom in the common sense path that a person would take to solve it, when we think of the straightforward means of solving a problem or dealing with everyday life. So that is one of the major challenges in trying to make a computer reason along the same paths that humans reason. It is not the ability to have them do creative things in the sense that creativity means different from those things that we already know how to do.
Now,
Wasn't there a frustration there since we don't really know how the human works, how the human mind does work? I mean, what's wrong with having a computer think along different lines? Won't that give you a different approach to the same subject?
From a pragmatic standpoint, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it at that level. But suppose that what we have is a computer that can perform very complex medical diagnosis. And the doctor now wants to figure out whether or not the reasoning process the computer went through is valid, makes sense, jives with his own experience, then it behooves the computer to explain its behavior along terms that the doctor can understand and comprehend each step. It doesn't just end at medical diagnosis or any other task that requires a high degree of expertise.
Professor, were you?
Yeah, the word experience keeps getting into this conversation. I think it's terribly important. Earlier, Bob McDonald said that if he were to ask you a question, you would answer according to your experience. You know, and that's exactly right. And again, here we're talking about experience. I think that an important thing to note is that a computer can't have every variety of human experience simply because it's a computer. For example, it hasn't had the experience of being separated from its mother and so on. And this it seems to me is one of the central points that I think ought to be observed about.
There are advantages and disadvantages of having mothers, but isn't it possible to develop computers that would have a sense of having a mother or a father?
Well, let me address a slightly simpler version of that question first, and that is that reasoning from one's past experience is an absolutely crucial cognitive effort. In fact, the main work that I'm doing now is reasoning by analogy to one's past experience, to be able to learn, have the computer learn from its mistakes and its successes and the experience of others that it can observe performing at a particular type of problem in order to improve its own behavior, in order to modify, to learn, and to adjust to a changing environment. So the ability to reason from experience is absolutely crucial. We know how to do parts of it, we don't know how to do other parts. Now, when this experience comes down to the early developmental psychological level of dealing with one's parents, I believe that we do have a bit of a gap between the abilities of a computer and those of a human.
Well,
Most humans don't do so well at that either.
No,
according to Freud.
I don't think it's necessary to decry that gap, and certainly I would say that one shouldn't say about it that, well, so far we have a gap and it'll all be closed. And nor am I emphasizing particularly early experience. That's just an illustration that's easy to understand. I think that, for example, the experience of being touched, I mean physically touched, of someone reaching out and giving you his hand, for example, or being touched on the cheek, and so on. These are experiences that computers obviously can't have. I mean, computers don't have cheeks. Well, they don't have cheeks. So they can't be touched.
Can't we build sense organs that can give them these experiences?
We certainly can build sense organs, whether the experiences will be a close analog of the human experience.
Could we give them erotic zones, for example?
Yes,
I'm sure this has been thought of by...
Yeah, but you see...
The point is not so much whether the specific experiences that Professor Weizenbaum is referring to here are those that the computer will necessarily be able to replicate, is whether or not in principle one can build a system that can reason from past experiences, whether they be sensory experiences, whether they be cognitive experiences, whether they would be flashes of insight, whatever one calls them. One needs to be able to incorporate that in one's thinking process.
And you think we can...
I think we can do so, and I think that we're in the process of making a very strong head start in that direction.
And will these machines or these friendly new entities help us become smarter, or...?
Well, they might help us in an educational setting to understand the specific experiences that the student is having in learning in this particular domain.
Look, there's no
we're going to have to come back to this for a moment. We're just getting going here. I, for one, need a little break, and we'll be back in a minute.
Our next guest is at the forefront of intelligent video games, which he believes can be an incredible educational tool if developed properly. He's the vice president of the XOR Corporation in Minnesota, and he's here to discuss the implications of his work. Joining Dr. Leary is Michael de St. Hippolyte.
I think one of the reasons I was chosen to host this show is that I'm not an expert. I'm fascinated, interested, and perhaps like many viewers, looking for the future to happen here today. I must say, at this moment, I feel a little more at home. There's something here that's familiar. It's a personal computer. It's something that we've all coming to get a little closer to in our daily life. And Michael, tell us, what's this about, and how are you going to increase our intelligence with this machine?
Well, I'd be happy to, Tim. And the first thing I'd like to say is that there's a difference between video games and computer games. And what I work on are computer games. And what that means is that a computer has the ability to compute interactively, to work interactively with you, which means that it doesn't have to be just an eye-hand coordination game. It can be something...
It's a thinking form of Pac-Man and
yeah, a thinking
Donkey
form of
Kong
Pac-Man.
with a high IQ.
That's right. And in fact, one of the games that I have out, it's called St. Hippolyte's Wall, named after me, I guess, is a thinking game because it's a game that involves decision-making and decision-making under uncertainty, under conditions of uncertainty. It plays differently every time. The idea of the game is you go around the screen and you gobble up prizes, sort of like Pac-Man, but whereas in Pac-Man the maze is the same every time, in St. Hippolyte's Wall the maze is constantly growing right around you. That's the wall.
It's like life.
It's like life, that's right. And just like life, you get a different set of prizes every time, and some of the prizes are good prizes, some of the prizes are bad prizes, and you also can eat the wall, which is sort of like making a bad situation into a good one. You know, taking advantage of the things in life that are working against you and turning them for you.
That could be quite a profound concept.
Well, I hope the game is seen as being profound, because while on the surface it seems like just may seem like another computer game to people who look at it for the first time, I found that as people play it, they realize that there's a little bit more to it. And for one thing, it's not the type of game where you're being pursued and either you get them before they get you. It's more of a game where you're confronted with the situation and you have to deal with the situation in a rational way, and there's not necessarily a best way of playing it, and you pretty much have to be just on your toes and thinking about what's going on. That's one way that computers can help increase intelligence, just by providing us with situations that we can react to. And there's...
Can you ever beat it?
Oh,
Can you ever get to the stage where you're better than the computer?
Yeah, I beat it about half the time, and when you get good at it, you get to beat it about half the time, and you know, we could make it harder, but the point is not to make the situation impossible, but the point is more to make the situation worthwhile and interesting and instructive.
Let me see if I understand this. You're developing personal computer games, and so you could go and pay about the same amount of money as a Pac-Man, take it home, and it could help you perhaps think more in a complex way, or increase your intelligence, or perhaps stimulate or activate you to become smarter. Is that right?
That's right. That's my goal. And also I have another goal, which is that I consider myself a craftsman or an artist. And just like an artist, when he or she works on a work of art, they can't help but put a little bit of their personality into it. Well, I believe that when people talk about artificial intelligence, it's a little bit misleading, because when regular people, non-computer people, think of intelligence, they think of, well, being able to remember all sorts of facts, or being able to add numbers very fast. And those are the sort of things that computers have been doing very well for a long time, and they do much better than we do. Whereas I would think that when you talk to computer scientists in artificial intelligence, and they describe to you the things that they're trying to accomplish, it's more like the things that 3-year-olds do,
well,
rather than things that scientists
Wendy
do.
and Jaime have been reminding us of.
That's right. And to me, it's more really personality than intelligence. And I like to put my personality in a computer. And in fact, a game that I have coming out in the near future, it's called Agent 2.0. The star of this game is a friendly computer named Wayne. And I happen to have brought Wayne along with me. And if you want to, we can talk to Wayne a little bit.
Wayne is going to be an agent, is that it?
Well, Wayne is going to help you. You're the agent in the game, and you have to solve a case. And Wayne will just help you. He's a friendly computer, and he may not be extremely smart, but he's a little bit smart. There's a certain amount of intelligence in there, and there's mostly a little bit of personality, and that was my goal. Would you like to talk to Wayne?
Hello.
Okay. Now you're going to ask the questions, and I'll type them in, and then Wayne will be able to answer us.
Hello. Peter, welcome. You've had the advantage of listening to some of the great minds of our times, including a 3-month-old intelligent entity. How does it all look to you from this vantage point?
I think it's a couple of things that'll be of interest to the audience. One being that we're beginning to see by talking to the people behind the scenes that computers are tools, and that this may be considered cyborg magic. And in fact, the last demonstration I enjoyed, I tend to work in the real world where we see the impact of the work of this august group. And I think some fundamental issues start to emerge. One being the computer is profoundly altering not necessarily the level of intelligence by the pesky humanoids out there, but rather the application of the existent base of intelligence. For instance, in management, historically survival mechanisms have been contingent upon an enormous capacity to retain factual information, i.e. a data bank, and to draw upon that data bank in the back and forth of business. And we're beginning to see a new samurai technocrat elite emerge in business who have begun to recognize that they no longer need to fill up their own humanoid data banks with tactics. Rather, they're focusing their intellect on excuse me, first day with the wooden teeth. They're focusing their efforts towards strategic solutions. And in the game, I thought it was personified in that in order to survive the game, all the tactics you know in the world won't help you because the tactics are being presented by the game. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, what it will do, if you play that game, is develop a keener sense of strategy. Mm-hmm. If that's an improvement in human intelligence, I'm not sure. It's a reapplication, and it is profoundly altering the personnel requirements for business. They're now looking for people who not only are computer literate, but people who have a capacity to prioritize information as to whether it's strategic or tactical. And I'm saying that if we have a finite capacity for information or knowledge, as it's been defined, we must recognize that the tool of the computer is infinitely superior at regurgitating facts. It knows who, what, where, when, why, who, what, where, when, and how. It doesn't know why.
Why?
Okay.
But doesn't it also have a new capacity now, though, to associate ideas and not just regurgitate facts, but put facts together in a pattern that perhaps you didn't think of?
There's always the possibility, all of us who've worked in computers have had the serendipitous experience where relational models have generated some so-called creative event. I think that ultimately that would be deemed by computer scientists to be an error.
That is perhaps an ultimate point of disagreement. If one views these, quote, relational models, these being primarily data banks, as the intelligence itself, one is then not viewing at what the fundamental problems are. The fundamental problems in artificial intelligence are precisely the methods of combining these facts to arrive at new conclusions and to solve problems that it could not solve without the combination of the facts in ways that are explicitly related, explicitly targeted at solving goals that are internal to the machine.
But when you're talking about solving problems, you must be talking about a specific class of problems, at least in my view. I think it's essentially a pun on the word problem that we talk about human problems. There's something, I quarrel with my wife, there's something, I have a problem with my marriage. And as soon as you say problem, then there's a suggestion that there may be a solution, just as there's a solution to mathematical problems. In fact, human problems are never solved, ever. If people may suggest to me that the solution to your problem is to get a divorce, okay, but that isn't a solution.
You heard this first
yeah,
on City TV.
That's a transformation of my problem, if I want to continue to use that word, to another problem, which may or may not be easier to live with. 20 years later, it may be that people that I'll notice that the problem I had, again to use that vocabulary with my marriage, has disappeared, but it was never solved. Now, what I'm getting at here is that computers, with or without artificial intelligence, can attack and solve usefully a particular class of problems, but there are other classes of problems, in particular human problems, which, although they can deal with them, seems to me must be dealt with in a way which is inappropriate to the problem being discussed.
Well, one can define a solution to a problem to be the best course of action that one can evaluate
Yes,
given
but-
all the knowledge at hand.
Yeah, okay, well,
And-
then we come back to the, first of all, use the use of the word best, and second, there's the question of all the relevant knowledge. And what I'm saying, and what I tried to say earlier, is that the knowledge we have and so on is ultimately a function of our experience. Okay, and there are certain experiences which we have, which lead us to take certain views of certain human situations, which a computer can't possibly have. You know, I mentioned touching. Now, I didn't mean, and I don't mean, that the computer can't be made to perceive a touch. What I do mean is that we understand, and the word understand has come in here many times, that we understand a touch. We sometimes understand a touch in terms of our experience.
I'd like to touch one base with you. We have about 1 minute left of this section. You've had some experience in the social and political implications of AI. Could you share that with us?
Well, following Professor Weizenbaum's historical concerns about AI, the holy grail of the computer scientist, if you will, I think that his concerns have been from a moralistic view. My concerns are more from a practicality buy-sell proposition. And I think what we're beginning to see...
Buy-sell in the commercial sense.
Well, life may be a buy-sell proposition.
All right. Yeah.
I think that ultimately, the professor's view that we ultimately don't solve human problems. We actually shortlist more desirable contingencies or environments that we can deal with. And I think that the trap is to create the illusion that the computer will solve our problems. It will aid as a tool.
It may or
in
may
help-
not.
It may or may not,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
at best, it has the capacity to shortlist possible solutions to our problems.
At this moment, we're going to have to short list this part of our program. The real fun begins in the next section when these great minds, and perhaps even Wayne's, will debate, discuss, challenge, and continue this electrifying conversation. Let's come back. I know Wendy has got a question or a comment to something that Professor Weisbaum said, so let's hear it.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about this issue of experience, which seems so very important. As you pointed out, computers do not have the wealth of experiences that people do, and that this might in fact be a limiting factor in what we can expect of them. But it's important to understand that people have two very different kinds of experiences as well. They have the first-hand experiences of direct interaction with the environment, and they have vicarious experiences. One of the presumably good things about our culture is the fact that we've got printing presses and we have information that's flying all over the place, and people can in fact learn about things that have not confronted them directly, and we can learn about them at levels which enable us to respond more intelligently to new situations and problems. Now, the computer obviously is more receptive to vicarious experience at this point than firsthand, and by being limited in that sense, we are actually learning a lot about what can be done with that level of information, and I think it's critical to understand that there is a lot of vicarious information we can give computers which will enable them to operate in ways we might not have expected. One of my problems that I work on is narrative text summarization. How do you give a computer a short story or a novel and have it come back with a one-sentence summary or a short paragraph describing what it was just exposed to?
Well, that's graduate student stuff here, isn't it?
Well, the problem has not been solved by any means, but we do have a program that can, in some sense, sift through all of the conceptual content that it's been exposed to and zero in on what is central and salient to the major theme that was being developed. And one of the surprising things that no one expected in developing that program was that the level of memory representation, the kind of information that the computer has to have access to in order to zero in on the central concepts, is information about affective reactions, emotional reactions that characters in the story have to each other. And obviously the computer program has not experienced emotive states itself, but we can give it some rudimentary knowledge of what it means to respond to something in a positive way or a negative way, and that has turned out to be crucial to a cognitive task which doesn't obviously connect in that direction.
I have absolutely no quarrel with anything you've said. That's exactly right. Okay, but I think it's also important, especially if we're going to be talking about computers dealing with human problems, that it's also important to emphasize what the limits are, and to say that while, of course, a computer can have vicarious experience in the sense that we can tell it what some things are about and all that, there's still that its ability to understand those experiences is limited by the fact by its own limitations to experience things. There's no question in my mind about that. For example, you're talking about now the computer summarizing a novel. Let's talk about, say, and as you know, this is the language that's used in the computer science community, the computer understanding a story or understanding a novel. Okay, what does that mean? Okay, I think that it's true that there's a whole world out there to which MIT has contributed very considerably, of people who believe that to understand a story is to be able to say what happened. Okay, that there is no effective understanding of a story. Okay, so that to understand King Lear is to be able to tell the story and so on.
But where does that come from? That comes from the fact that we don't know how to evaluate human understanding either. If I need to test a student on story comprehension, what do? I ask questions about the story. I ask, can you summarize the story?
Yeah, but we're not. I'm talking about real life now. I'm not talking about testing a student. Okay, I'm talking about what a computer can understand and can't understand, and what the limitations of that are. And what I'm suggesting, there's a form of human understanding, which is a function of having had human experiences, and hence to interpret, a function of interpreting vicarious understanding, vicarious information we get, as for example in novels. This interpretation is done again on the basis of our experience.
Would you say that a doctor could understand what appendicitis is? A particular doctor who can treat appendicitis, diagnose it, cure it, teach other prospective doctors about it, has not himself experienced appendicitis.
Not to mention pregnancy.
No, that's not what I'm saying. It is true. It is true that men's understanding of pregnancy, for example, is limited by the fact that men can't have the experience of being pregnant. It is limited.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
But it does not
It doesn't mean
doctors from
that's right.
an extremely useful
That's
role
right. Absolutely.
in helping out with pregnancies and helping delivery
From
babies.
the beginning of conception all the way through.
Yeah.
But it doesn't
That's exactly right. I mean, yes, it doesn't require total human understanding to solve an infinitude of problems. That's exactly right.
Okay,
But I'm trying to...
You equate understanding with absolute, complete, first-hand experience.
No. And that's just wrong. But
That's what you've been saying.
Well, I'm talking about understanding a certain class of events.
Checkmate here?
No, I'm talking about understanding a certain class of events which are grounded in human experience and so on. The doctor's or the surgeon's understanding of appendicitis is certainly not a complete understanding. It's an understanding which is adequate to the purpose. Okay, and one of the things we haven't talked about
exactly. Now, this understanding
adequate to the purpose changes the game again.
Exactly, and this is precisely the type of understanding that we are trying to achieve with AI systems to aid human thinking, reasoning, and to replicate those aspects of it.
And I congratulate you and wish you well. Okay, I think that if that's the kind of understanding that you're working on and so on, and I know you are personally, then that's wonderful. Okay, there's no question about it. What I'm getting at here is essentially the imperialism of artificial intelligence, where by imperialism I mean the attempt to govern domains which aren't probably its.
Peter, are you going to comment here?
Well, the question I have follows this line of thought. Given that the computer is infinitely more powerful than a shovel or a pair of pliers, is your concern that because we've created a very powerful tool, that you see that as being analogous to the problems of society, that if we allow the dependency models to occur, that we'll have autocracy, centralized power?
No, that's not like that. That's much too simple. No. My concern is something like this: that someone I may be sitting next to on an airplane, and who comes to know that I'm a professor at MIT, thinks that I must be so smart. Okay, that I ought to listen to the problems he has with his children and whatever, that I'll undoubtedly come up with better answers than anybody else because I'm so much smarter. Well, that's wrong. Okay, whether or not I can deal with his questions has a lot to do with his social and economic situation, to what extent I understand that, whether I have children of my own or not, and so on and so forth. What I'm talking about here, the danger that I see, is that we come to such an awe of computers, and especially of artificial intelligence.
That at all. No one hears. I think you're setting up a straw man, and you're certainly wailing and whacking away.
But I did see you stroking that computer, saying, "Isn't it nice to have it like it was a pet?" You were humanizing that thing, and I think there's a role distinction here that needs to be defined. Like, what is it we want the computers to do? And there's an interesting parallel science that's here, which is the science of neurology, where the neurologists are trying to understand how does the brain work, and if we can figure that out and see any patterns in how the cells in the cortex fire according to certain stimulus, then maybe we can apply that to the computer and therefore make the computer better at calculating. But we're not trying to say, okay, well, if we can give the computer all of the related experiences and emotions that we use, like I don't know how it is I'm talking right now. I don't know what my brain is doing to give me this flow of words. But if we could figure that out, then we could say, well, okay, we could have a literate computer of some kind. But is that really what we want? Do we want the computer to then say, or do we want to ask the computer, how do you feel about this novel? No. What we don't care about that. What we maybe want to know is how many Hamlets are there in other associated novels? How many other characters like Hamlet could I find in other areas, or things like that? We wanted to associate ideas and put them together, not necessarily express its emotions.
Well, Michael, you haven't had a chance here.
Yeah, I would like to just stick up for computers here a little bit, because I don't know if we have the right to say that computers do not have the right to think and feel if that's what happens.
And to be stroked.
If they develop it, I mean, computers are already getting to the point where they are improving themselves. There are programs that are able to make themselves more efficient, and we're still a long ways away from intelligence or feelings or anything. But the first step towards artificial intelligence is artificial stupidity, and maybe we've gotten to that step already. But what I think is a good question to throw out here is, do we have the right to tell computers that they can't think? If and when the day comes that a computer can show you every sign of being intelligent and of being capable of feeling, well, what would be your reaction? Would you pull out the plug? Do you have the right to pull out the plug?
This is the beginning of a computer liberation movement. Free the computer.
It might
Peter. That if I can. You use terms that I'm uncomfortable with. The right. I don't believe in rights. I think that ultimately...
You're not an abolitionist.
No, and I think that there's an assumption of altruism here that this thing marches on inexorably. Ultimately, market imperative, draw the science towards some conclusion. And I think that the question that stems from the extension of your point is that what do we do with a reasoning computer? Because once we understand the need, the market imperatives surface, and we will then go forward. With the exception of language translation, which is obviously a key role, is it the nobling pursuit of knowledge that will drive artificial intelligence? I think not. I think it'll be market imperatives that will ultimately realize it.
Professor, I hate to think about that marketing imperatives drive science and engineering and so on. Perhaps you're right, okay, but if you're right, then it's a very, very dark picture. I should think that human will comes into it, and that some idea of what we may want and what we may not want comes into it, quite irrespective of marketing imperatives. Now, maybe you're right, but if you are, then it's